We won't go into details, but in those days, you took a ship and it was a long journey. It wasn't just jumping on a plane.
I'm wondering, after all these deeper experiences, so much, exaltation, how is his experience in England now? Do you think he could keep this bliss?
So we'll see. He doesn't keep, right? He plunges down into the darkness. So we'll see what he says. But first, so PB goes back to England, and Ramana comments about PB to someone else. There's the Swami of the Ramakrishna order named Siddhisvarananda. He actually becomes a very dear friend of PB later on when PB comes back. So Siddhisvarananda goes to visit Ramana, and Ramana says the following: Is not Brunton a wonderful man? With such a short stay in India, he has become able to enter into the very basis of our life. Now, if you think of the context, India was a colony of England.
In 1930s, and he went there in 1930s.
He went there during the colonial times.
Mm-hmm.
And the English, for the most part, were not interested in the Indians. They were not interested in understanding India. They were not respectful of the Indian religion. They were not respectful of the Indian beliefs. They were colonizers. They were taking away and they were not receiving. They were not learning. So PB was really different. He was one of the rare ones who felt there's something here for me to learn, and I'm going to treat these people with respect and dignity. So PB has now Brian's hint. PB has a lot of difficulties. He goes home to cold, damp England, and he writes to a friend in 1931. He says, I am going through an exceedingly difficult time, with bills and debts pressing hard for payment and certain unavoidable expenses which must be met. PB probably spent a lot of money. One of our friends told us it was a 1 year salary of a working person to pay for the voyage. So he was broke. He comes back with broke and he says, now I have to start moving again. Unfortunately, so next week I must run about once more in quest of the Holy Grail. I want a furnished room cheaply. So he becomes really disillusioned. The glow has worn off. He says, all the world seems so futile today, so I don't know what awaits me tomorrow. I do not understand life half as clearly as I did 10 years ago when I had my neat parcel of theosophic theories to explain everything. Now I am too pessimistic about everything. So remember, when PB was a teenager, he was in the Theosophical Society and he studied all these theories and he had all these explanations and everything seemed to make sense, but it was only an intellectual understanding. It wasn't a deeper understanding. So it evaporated and he got depressed. PB also talks about this in the notebooks, right? One of our themes is that PB's own experiences are transformed into the wisdom that he shares in the notebooks. So what does PB say in the notebooks? The path is punctuated by both setbacks and advances. It is human to feel an upsurge of alarm when reverses occur, but it is philosophic not to let this become panic. It is natural to feel depressed when bad news comes, but it is philosophic not to let this develop into despair. The personal self must lay its tribute at the feet of the universal being, and it must do this no less during times of misfortune as during times of happiness. So we know, for instance, that the Brazilian teacher Tigurino, who himself was a student of PB, said, every test is a blessing. Every trial that comes to you is for your growth. But PB doesn't know this right now. We also want to quote from the great nephew of Ramana. The great nephew of Ramana was named Ganeshan. He was alive during Ramana's life until he was 14. He later became the president of the ashram, and although he didn't physically meet PB, he had great, great respect for PB. And this is what he says about PB in one of his books on this theme. Ganeshan says, the way that Paul Brunton was guided by the higher power throughout his struggles, how whenever he was falling down, the higher power was helping him, is a great inspiration for us and a pointer to every seeker that if you surrender to the higher power within, that higher power will lead you through. So Ganeshan is saying something that we frequently said in these videos, which is that PB is an example for all of us. And Ganeshan, who's the great nephew of Ramana, who knew Ramana, sees this about PB, that PB can be an example. Nowadays, we call it a role model for all of us.
Mhm.
So PB is going through all these ups and downs, but finally, after 3 years, he finishes the book, which is published as A Search in Secret India. It's a huge success. PB becomes famous, and it makes Ramana famous. It's widely acknowledged at the ashram and the people who were with Ramana that until PB wrote this book, Ramana was an unknown. Nobody knew about him. If you read one of the more famous books, Talks with Ramana, which is a record of his talks, his answers to questions, and you look in the table of contents under Paul Brunton, there's like 20 or 30 references. And if you look at each reference, 90% of them are Indians who read PB's book, who came to Maharishi and said, I read Paul Brunton's book and this. I read Paul Brunton's book and I had a question. So we see that it was because of PB that the Maharishi became known. It was PB's destiny to bring notoriety to Maharishi. So this book is really popular, and someone writing in a journal in India says, translated into many languages, The Search in Secret India is one of the most enlightening books on this country, on India, ever published, and is enjoying great popularity. So while PB is in England, he's also doing other things. He's meeting with a group of Egyptologists, and they're studying the ancient philosophic occult traditions of Egypt. They're meeting every week. They're reading all the things that all the occultists say about Egypt. What does Blavatsky say? What does Plato say about Atlantis? What does Steiner say? They do this huge research, and they develop these theories that there's some secret chambers in the pyramid that nobody knew about, and they want to find out if it's really there. So PB goes to Egypt. He sleeps in the pyramid. He comes back and writes A Search in Secret Egypt, which also becomes a famous book. So now he has 2 famous books to his credit. And now he's ready to go back to India. He's really anxiously looking forward to spending a lot of time with Maharishi.